You're watching an amazing podcast from an amazing podcast company.
What's up, Mob Talk Associates? Jimmy Naples here, Johnny Chechitelli. We're the Steel Valley Syndicate, and we're here again for another episode of Youngstown Mob Talk. Today, we got a great episode. We have author Paul Hodos on in his book, The City Mafia, Blood, Betrayal, and Pittsburgh's Last Dawn. But before we get to that, Johnny, let's talk about our sponsors real quick.
Of course, a huge shout out to our sponsors, Cut and Toast. They've been with us since the beginning. These guys are awesome. They're down in Struthers on 160 Lowellville Road. They've got so many good cigars and accessories. Next time, Paul, if you come to the Valley, we got to go down there to Cut and Toast. They got a great lounge. We'll have a good cigar and have a good time. And of course, we also got to shout out our other huge sponsor, Youngstown Tile. For spectacular flooring, go bold, go local, go Youngstown Tile.
At Youngstown Tile Retail Design Center, we're your local leaders in residential flooring and luxury home projects. We have proudly served our customers in the local community for over 70 years. We carry top brands such as Dow Tile, Mapei, Schluter Systems, and many more. At Youngstown Tile Retail Design Center, we want to help bring your renovation ideas to life. For quality service, quality products, best-in-class customer service. Go bold, go local, go Youngstown Tile.
Thank you so much. Please, everybody that's watching today, we really do hope that you support our sponsors. That's what's able to, kind of pay the bills for me and Jimmy to get us, the time to do more content for you. We're working on Vice Squad episodes. We're working on Mob Talk episodes. We've got live shows coming up. We've got a big one we're planning right now.
Absolutely.
Cannot wait for you guys to find out what we're working on and be able to share that with you. Of course, we've got the Youngstown Mob Tour app. It's coming out this summer. It'll be a big one for everybody. We're just working on so many things. So again, that's why we thank our sponsors. And Jim, we got a special guest today, like as you mentioned, an author.
Absolutely. We have Paul Hodos with us. Paul, we want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to come share with us this great book that you wrote here, Steel City Mafia, Blood, Betrayal, and Pittsburgh's Last Dawn. It comes out April 17th. Thanks for being with us, and let's dive right into this, because I think this is going to be a pretty interesting topic. A lot of ties, Youngstown and Pittsburgh. And
welcome to Youngstown Mob Talk, Paul.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm a huge fan of you guys' videos and of your Facebook page, of course, too.
Awesome.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
And hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, join that Facebook group. We're almost up to 30,000 people. We'll pick somebody. We'll give them some cool merch. One of our new members. So, definitely be our 30,000th member of the Youngstown Mob Facebook group. So lots of cool stuff on there. But all right, Jim, I'm gonna let you take the lead on this. For anybody, I'll give a little bit of a background and then toss it to you here. For anybody who's a newbie to the show, Youngstown is right in between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. So for many years, it was controlled by different factions, some from Cleveland, some from Pittsburgh. Eventually, the Pittsburgh, La Cosa Nostra, the Pittsburgh family is in full control of Youngstown. By the 1980s, especially 90s, Youngstown belonged to Pittsburgh, you could say. So, two made men from the Pittsburgh family. That's kind of the background going into this. And of course, Jim, you know that well.
Absolutely. The Pittsburgh crime family's always been kind of near and dear to my heart. If you want to put it that way, but a lot of fascinating stuff. I mean, of course, in the Pittsburgh organized crime circles, I mean, there's ties all the way to Old Man Rooney, and I'm sure Paul can attest to that. One time he controlled the type of slot machines that were allowed to come into the Pittsburgh area.
I always wondered why you were a Pittsburgh Steelers fan.
Hey, the ties run deep. What can I say? So, Paul, let's get into this real quick.
Sure.
So talk to us. Chapter 1 of your book, you talk about the early history of the family. Tell us a little bit about that research, that you that you found. Tell us some interesting stuff.
Sure things. Let me first start out by saying that the book is mainly focused on sort of like the more modern history of Cosa Nostra in the Pittsburgh area and in Ohio and in West Virginia too. Um, it is, the main part of the story happens late 70s to the end of the family in the 2000s. So that's where I focus. But obviously, a lot of the players got their start way before then. And it was also necessary to tell the early history of the family so you could understand it. So the early history part is pretty quick in the book, but I do cover it. And Basically, it starts out, Italian criminal groups really started in Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh area in like the late 1800s. And then as you move through the World War One era, there are a few people who you can kind of identify as leaders of mafia groups in that area, but it doesn't really become very clear until you get to the 1920s with Stefano Monastero and Joseph Siragusa and John Bazzano Sr. And what those guys have in common is that they were all assassinated. And as is the case with a lot of mafia families in the 1920s and 30s, Pittsburgh was very chaotic. And there were a lot of murders. I read an article in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that said that there was an estimated 200 murders during a few-year period in that time
Wow.
in the Pittsburgh area. Bootleggers fighting each other. One of the things that's unique about Pittsburgh, I think, is that they also had to contend with groups of police and politicians that were sort of competing with them for this bootlegging revenue.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think as a result, Cosa Nostra in Pittsburgh in the early days might not have been as powerful as it was in some of the other cities where it crept up at that time. Even like you think about Cleveland, I think they were very powerful. I'm not, in my opinion, after looking at all the documents and that I've looked at, is that it might not have been as powerful as a city like Cleveland at that time.
It's funny you mentioned Cleveland. Cleveland at that time had a lot of murders as well. I'm sure some of the bigger cities did back then,
Right.
around, Prohibition, right before Prohibition, and that whole era. Cleveland had some crazy number of cops that were killed. Like the worst job you could have in that era was like a Cleveland cop.
Wow.
They were getting killed left and right. But, do you think when all those guys get assassinated, do you think that was the beginning, the consolidation of power, if you will? Was that all, one party, or group that was behind all of those, or no?
The Monastero killing, which was the first one, I think that was just rival bootleggers in his area. The Siragusa one, there are some people who think that was related to sort of like the national syndicate movement, where you had Lucky Luciano versus Maranzano and all that going on.
Siragusa was like a mustache Pete or something.
I'm not, to a certain extent, like viewed that way anyway. But I'm not so sure that that's true, but that is people's sense. Like I've never seen any direct evidence of that. But as far as the last one, Bazzano, that's the clearest. He basically attacked his rivals, the Volt brothers. And he was able to kill a few of them in a coffee shop in Pittsburgh. They actually operated closely together, but they had a falling out. And this assassination, which is kind of like Pittsburgh's version of the St. Valentine's Day massacre that happened in Chicago. So the remaining brothers went to the newly formed commission, and they complained about Bazzano taking them out. And the commission agreed that Bazzano had acted foolishly, and so they tricked him. They invited him to supposedly a dinner in his honor, and he went to Brooklyn for the dinner. And according to sources from back then, he was basically attacked at that dinner by some of the bosses who were there with ice picks, and that he was garroted, and his body was put into a burlap sack and dropped off in a Brooklyn street. And
Wow.
it was basically a message to Pittsburgh, and probably to the smaller families, really, too. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
keep your stuff in order. Consult with us. When
You know,
make-
you mentioned the Volt brothers. I'm an anomaly here. Well, there's a few of us, the Italians out here in Youngstown, but I'm a New York Yankees fan, and I'm always rocking the Yankee hat. And we've got a brand new shortstop on our team, a hot rookie this year named Anthony Volpe, and spells it the same. Pronounces it Volpe. I don't, I'm not sure. You said Volpe. I'm not, don't know if they're related at all, but man, it'd be cool. It's a little Pittsburgh connection with on the Yankees there, but
there's a possibility. I mean, like like a lot of the Volt brothers survived, so I'm not sure, but I'm sure they had kids. One of them survived even into the 80s. Lou Volpe, he was still a member of the Pittsburgh Mafia that late. So,
wow, yeah, that's a name you see a lot in the FBI files.
Yeah.
From that era. Anytime it mentions when you're looking through the Mahoning Valley stuff, anytime it mentions Pittsburgh, there's the Volt brother. Those killings were mentioned a lot.
There's a few names that seem to keep coming up, Youngstown related. Of course, the Manarino brothers.
yeah.
Mike Genovese, of course. Then there's a few other ones that not too many people may have heard of. Alzide is another one.
Yep.
Our last guest, Emil Denzio, mentioned that he was good friends with Al.
Yeah. and it turns out, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but Al ended up being an informant, wasn't he?
So he was killed for being an informant, and from what I've read,
Okay.
I'm not quite sure if he was. It seems almost like he was like maybe a local police informant. What the story that I had read is that Alzide, who was like you said, affiliated with Manarino, another guy named Sonny Ciancutti, who was or Cianchuti, I've heard it said both ways, up in New Kensington. He was a Jewish racketeer who was very confident and very, very showy, it seemed. And the story I heard is that some New York guys suspected him of informing on a basically a burglary or a robbery that they were going to commit, and the police were there to sting those guys, and they talked to Paul Hankish about it and some of the guys in Pittsburgh about it, and apparently they got the okay to kill Zede, and he was killed in Western Pennsylvania. I'm forgetting the town right now, but he was found in what was called a stump hole in a local paper I read, and he was severely beaten and shot. So they certainly thought that he was an informant, I think, but he was killed, and he, like maybe the day before, maybe 2 days before, he was actually coming out of court on a charge that he was getting charged with. I think it was gambling or something like that. Sorry, I don't have it right in front of me. But
That's okay.
But when he came out of court, a reporter was asking him questions, and he said, "I won't serve a day," and didn't. But it wasn't the reason that he thought.
Yeah, he didn't.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's go. Let's dive back into the Larocca family.
Sure.
Give our audience a little bit of information on John Larocca. Not too many people know that much about him. I know he kind of tried to keep out of the limelight and things like that. Tell us what you found about him in your research.
So in my research, I think John Larocca was very careful, much like his successor, Mike Genovese, and much like his predecessor, actually, Frank Amato Sr. Those three guys were very careful. Larocca specifically, I think he limited the amount of murders that occurred. You know, I'd say like associates were fair game under his reign. You know, it was pretty hard to kill a made man in Pittsburgh generally. They really tried to limit that. The family, as you guys are aware, I'm sure, was pretty small under Larocca and under Genovese. You know, I'd say it basically went back and forth between 20 and 30 members, and compared to places like New York or things like that, that's pretty small. But as far as like Youngstown goes, there was always a pretty heavy contingent there. I think Youngstown was one of the strongest crews they had under Larocca or Genovese. A lot of guys, a lot of associates that were being treated like made members, in my opinion. You had Ernie Biandello, who's he acts like a made man basically, but he was an associate.
Yeah, I've well, a good friend of ours um, was able to show us, quote, the booth where Ernie B got promoted. So if that means
Yeah.
that's like, there's Ernie B. Some people did think that he was made. I don't believe that. I believe he was probably going to be made if he wasn't killed. Um,
Yeah,
but it was Ernie Biandillo's a big name, and of course he was Joey Naples, right hand man there for a while.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, you know, what can you tell us about, you know, real quick? And this, I know this is not going to be in your book, but
hmm
it's kind of what we're talking about here. We've come across some stuff. You've got these different factions in Youngstown, um, and you've got like the Calabrese group there, and there's guys being made in Mike Romeo's or Paul Romeo's basement, right out in
Yeah.
Camel in the '60s. And it's like, that goes counter to so much of what you hear a lot of, guys getting made a lot, right? They've got to, they go to wherever the boss's house, or in Pittsburgh, or they got to go to New York, or whatever they got to do to get made. You always hear, oh,
hmm
this guy was made in Detroit or whatever. It just blows my mind that we've come across the research and stuff that shows that they were bringing guys into the fold in Camel and this other faction,
hmm
and like, it just kind of blows up the general idea of what people think are the rules, for this
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, and I think, and if I'm not mistaken, and I think you just mentioned it, but let me clarify. That was in the 1960s and before, right? Like the stuff you were seeing mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and this is just my theory after having looked at a lot of things, and just talking to them, like you guys have too, like talking to other mafia experts. There's so many people out there who are doing pretty in-depth research, and I know that you've mentioned some of them on your show, and there's definitely a few others that you haven't. And so when you look at all that together, I think that there was a lot more fluidity 1960s and prior, with allegiances and with people getting made in different families and switching, and I'm not saying that it didn't happen after then, but it seems to have been a little more common. And there was something I had a conversation on another podcast recently, and it was had mentioned that Joe Sika, who was an old school Pittsburgh guy, who was around for decades and decades, and he lived until the early '90s. And he was attempting to recruit Alphonse D'Arco, who was the acting boss of the Lucchese family at a certain point. But before he got made in New York, he was related to Joe Sika, so he was trying to get him to come to Pittsburgh and get made there because he knew he was an earner, and he knew that New York was kind of slow rolling his making ceremony. They weren't making a lot of guys at the time, so Al D'Arco was getting a bit frustrated. And so Sika tried to pull him over, and that was something old school guys did. Like there was this kind of network, Cosa Nostra network, up until the 1960s that was kind of trying to pull from different families and they would trade and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it was like a baseball team or something like that, but
No, yeah, we've come across a lot of that, yeah, from guys going from Cleveland to LA and everything. Yeah, there was these trades, as you say, they did happen.
A lot of
yeah,
it
as
too.
time went on, I think it became rarer.
Yeah. From what I read too, in those times, if if the books were supposedly closed in a family and they
Mhm.
wanted somebody to get made, they might send them to Detroit or Buffalo, family
Yes.
that had open books and have
And then
them
they
made.
transfer back.
And then they might stay up there for 6 months or whatever, and then they'd come back.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I
And
think that kind of
yeah.
confused a lot of people as to who was actually made, who actually wasn't, right?
Mhm.
Because you had guys going out of town to get made, and the only people that would really know that those guys were made were people in those circles.
Yep. And if you don't mind, I'll bring up Henry Zola, Zebo Zola.
Yeah.
And he was kind of an overseer for Youngstown in a way, like kind of like Mike Genovese's eyes and ears in Youngstown, and also the cash collector. And there's a big debate about whether or not he's made. I think he's made. I think he was made. I think it would be ridiculous to have him over Lenny Strollo, collecting cash. The person who actually worked him in law enforcement, a retired agent, FBI agent, does not think he was made. But I just think that by that point that they were not advertising ceremonies. Mike Genovese was very worried about making ceremonies after 1989 when the Boston Mob, one of their ceremonies was recorded. So I think they just kept it super low key and he was made, but there's definitely a dispute about it. Even a guy like that who was very powerful and who was basically, in the 90s, kind of like the acting boss of the family, the street boss.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this: the feds didn't know everybody who was made. That's definitely a fact.
Yeah.
They didn't know it. It's like
Right.
you said, the numbers in different families bounce, at different times, and there's no way the feds know all these guys who were made. I'm sure they know a bunch, and they know what they're told, especially by some of these other guys as well.
Right.
But it's it is interesting. It's Zebo, from what I was told, is that Zebo was really kind of a player here after Joey was killed.
Mhm.
That's kind of when Zebo
Yeah, because
became a bigger presence, I guess.
from some of the people that I've talked to that actually worked for my Uncle Joey, they told me that before Joey was killed, Mike Genovese would come down here and they would meet, in the back of Margie's Golden Needle on Market Street, and they'd have business meetings there. And there's a few other places in town that they would meet. And these were like big to do events because these guys, when they come into town, it was big business, usually large money transfers, things like that.
And one of our other guy, mentions to us that Joey would go. It was a weekly meeting that he would go to They would go to Pittsburgh, and yeah. So
And
you know,
and when you're talking about those meetings, like operational security wise, like I think that the Youngstown crew and the Pittsburgh family just generally were very good at that. Like when you think about a meeting like that, I haven't seen anything in any documents about anything like that happening at that late a date where when Mike was the boss.
Yeah.
And the only real inkling that I got that they were even sort of visiting there was once again that former FBI agent that I was talking about. He told me that one time he was taking his family to, I think it was SeaWorld or something like that in Ohio. And as he was on the highway, he saw Chucky Porter driving down the highway with Mike Genovese in the passenger seat, and they got off at the Youngstown exit.
yeah.
And he called up the Youngstown squad of FBI and was like, "Hey, Mike and Chucky are coming into town. I don't know why, but they're coming in."
I passed them on the freeway.
Yeah,
Hold on, kids. I got to pull over and use a payphone real quick.
Well, and two, what's funny is, if you look at a lot of the FBI documents, even on Joey and things like that, you don't get much that comes out of the Youngstown area.
No, no.
Most of it's either, if it was something they were doing up in Cleveland, it's coming out of Cleveland or it's coming out of Pittsburgh, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have too much out of Youngstown, and there was a reason for that. Um,
Yep.
according to our former Congressman Jim Trafficant,
Yeah.
and
many other sources.
and many other sources, they were Joey and them were paying the feds 25 grand a month to stay off their back, and it seemed to be working for the most part.
And
Under one Stanley Peterson's reign
Well,
in the FBI. And,
even after that, I think
well,
even after that with Larry Lynch, because we've tried to reach, we've asked people, hey, should we reach out to Larry Lynch, and we've gotten 16 and 17 reasons why we shouldn't, but nobody's given us one why we should.
yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to say here, pretend to know, whether or not anybody else was under, but under the, the bribes or the payments from the mob. But I am confident to say from all our research, in the Senate testimonies, um, the cloud of suspicion is enough over Stanley Peterson to say, I'm pretty confident, Peterson was on the take. And the fact that they brought him back and became chief of police here after he was caught by another group of law enforcement that kind of did their own sting on Peterson. He was exposed. He was transferred out of the FBI, out of Youngstown after 20 years. He retires shortly thereafter, and then the mob brings him back and appoints him the chief of police.
yeah, yeah.
I'm confident enough to say for Peterson, I would bet my life on it. But anybody else,
Absolutely.
I'm not sure. I would love to talk to Larry Lynch. Larry, if you're watching this,
Yeah.
and maybe we'll reach out to you because I've got some contacts that can put me in touch with Larry. But if it'd be worth talking about for sure. But it goes to, would you say this, Paul, that from what I've seen, at least in the research, Cleveland, the Pittsburgh bosses weren't as scrutinized or as followed as much as, say, Licavoli was when he was boss in Cleveland. The profile was so high on them that they had Licavoli's daily routines. He was being watched and monitored, and everywhere he went, every single person that walked in his house, they were trailing the people that would walk into his house. They would trail them for the rest of the day. They were trailing everybody out of Cleveland there in the 70s, the late 70s, just in a kind of a lot of man hours put into tracking their every movement. I don't think that was the case in Pittsburgh with guys like Genovese, and by that time, do you?
So post pre-Appalachian, I would agree with you, but that was pretty much all the mob because I don't think the American public nor even federal law enforcement were aware of how big it had actually gotten completely in a complete way, a complete picture. But when after the Appalachian meeting happened, I get the sense that in the late 50s, especially, the Pittsburgh office was very focused on um, the mob there. Mike Genovese for sure, and I gave you those files. And they're lengthy. They're thousands and thousands of surveillance reports that basically say the same thing over and over again. But
So you have come across that same kind of scrutiny,
yeah,
then?
he would
Okay.
he would. It was very hard to surveil him though, and Larocca too, actually, because they were living out in the burbs, and I think it was hard. I think it was hard to even set up there. They For Genovese specifically, like they had local cops kind of driving by every once in a while, and then they would report back and say, "Oh, I saw this person going in there, this person going in there." But it was very hard to set up on his specific house over there in like in the woods, basically.
Yeah, because
Um,
they both of them had houses that were kind of out, like, they had like
yeah,
larger estates that had some
yeah,
land and stuff to it. So
not
it was kind of easy to notice somebody sitting up down the block watching your house.
yes, exactly. And just generally, they were super cagey. I mean, like these guys, Mike Genovese wouldn't even meet with other dons that traveled to his territory in the 80s and then in the in the 90s too. So like it was it was extreme caution like all the time. And with Cleveland, Cleveland is like the Danny Green War, like just put too much heat on them. And
Yeah, way
Pittsburgh
too
did not
much.
have an equivalent of that. They had the Youngstown Carabia War, the Naples Prado versus Carabia War, but that didn't bring as much heat. You know, there there weren't really made guys getting killed in that, and like they worked it hard, but I just don't think it was the same level as like the Green and Nardi and
Yeah.
Cleveland War.
Well, Cleveland too. Plus, Cleveland had all the other stuff going on with the Teamsters, and so that was drawing extra attention up there as well. And so I think that kind of was another thing that contributed to Cleveland being a little bit more overblown than, say, Youngstown or Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Cleveland really was like, if you think about it, like the first family that got taken down by like Rico, like they're really the test case, like the test balloon. And I
Yeah.
do think that was certainly like there was a little bit of an accident there because they just started to get crazy in the 70s, and then they were like prosecutors were interested in using the RICO law around that time. And
Yeah.
and it just coalesced and they became, and even Angelo Leonardo, an underboss and then an acting boss flipping, it was almost like the prototype for everything that happened afterwards. Because when
Yeah.
you think about how many underbosses flipped after him, and acting bosses too,
Mhm.
it was really like Cleveland was like the archetype. And I think
Yeah.
Pittsburgh, uh, you know, John Larocca, one of the most aggressive things that he did, we were talking about how careful he was give the okay to kind of move into Youngstown for Pittsburgh. He saw Cleveland becoming weak. And I think Manarino had a lot to do with that, but if you look at the Angelo Leonardo testimony, there was a certain point where, you know, you're like LaRocca's aware. They met with LaRocca and he says, hey, we think Charlie Carabia has to die, So he was clearly aware of what was going on. That's a pretty aggressive move for him to move in on the territory like that, but they saw an opportunity because of the weakness that Cleveland was
Yeah.
experiencing.
Yeah. Honestly, I think in that particular instance, it would have been, Briar Hill Jimmy Prado talking to LaRocca, right, and kind of giving his point, and then LaRocca pretty much backing Prado's, because there's plenty of evidence. Prado was caught on wiretap talking
Yeah.
about getting rid of Charlie, and for even decades before he was
Yeah.
there. He said he talked too much in in the 1960s.
In the 60s, yeah.
So
Yep.
there was no love lost there. They were I trying to get rid of Charlie Carabia for a while. Prado was a thorn in Prado's side. So
Yeah,
I'm
and I
sure
think you're
that
right. I think Prado was Prado and Naples were probably talking to Manarino. Manarino was talking to LaRocca, and at a certain point, like, they're still very respectful of Cleveland. That's the amazing thing about that fight, right? Like, it never escalated to the point where it like became where you're killing made guys. Like, I don't think the Carabias were going to go after Prado himself or anything like that. Like, unless you guys have seen something, I'd find that very interesting. But at
well,
the time, Naples was an
not Prado, Joey. They
Yeah.
did want to get rid of Joey. Maybe they did mention Jimmy. But this was after Charlie Carabia was killed. It was kind of the order, came down from Ronnie's in jail and going to prison. But yeah, let me ask you this. I'm going to pivot a little bit here. You talked a bit about the Pittsburgh bosses living out in the sticks, right?
Mhm.
They did a lot of hunting. Isn't that right? Like, what can you tell us about the hunting club that they had here? You don't often hear about, mob bosses being big hunters. So, growing up in
Yeah.
Youngstown, I always joke that, my great grandfather was off the boat, became a coal miner in West Virginia, and eventually family moved to Youngstown. We were like the hillbilly Italians. We hunted, we, did a lot of hunting and fishing and stuff. So it's kind of cool to see, like, these pictures of these guys, Charlie Murgy and Genovese and these other guys, like in this hunting, they would always do these hunting trips. What can you tell me about that?
So I'm gonna have to keep it kind of vague. So, and I'll tell you why. So I have spoken to whatever you want, a source who has great knowledge of that, and I appreciate hearing that person's stories. But he also said, those stories are my stories, and I'm the one who tells them. So I have to keep it, uh, respect him, and keep it at that. But as far as the stuff that was in the documents and the stuff generally that I've heard from not from that source, um, they did have a hunting camp up in Tianesta, and Mike Genovese loved to hunt, and Pecora, and basically the hierarchy of the family. Pecora was the underboss. Mike Genovese was obviously high up and then became the boss eventually. And then Charlie Imburgia, who was the consigliere, at least at some point. Uh, those guys love to hunt, and I'm from Western Pennsylvania originally. I live in Maryland now, but uh, my father loved to hunt. My relatives love to hunt. I'm not really a hunter, but that Western Pennsylvania hunting tradition is strong. And
Yeah.
like the Pittsburgh family can sometimes seem like an alien institution because it was so secretive and separate from everything. But when you talk about hunting, like it reminds you these guys were actually just Western Pennsylvanians, and Eastern Ohioans as well.
Yeah.
And they loved that tradition, and there are some vague references to them having business meetings up there too, uh, but I don't have anything more specific than that. But
Yeah, well,
you
go
see
ahead.
people, mob bosses, taking these like extravagant vacations and stuff like that. If you look at the New York guys, and these guys are just going hunting. So
Yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
it's very Western Pennsylvania.
Do you know what they hunted? Was it like white-tailed deer? What are they hunting?
Yeah, deer is what the
Yeah.
main thing was for sure. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I'll tell you this. Tell your source, and I don't know if they watch the show at all, but hey, we respect that. If they do want to share that story, we'll love to hear it from their mouth. Paul, bring them back on. We'll come on. We'll do another guest spot. But we'd love to hear some hunting stories. That'd
Absolutely.
be fantastic.
I'll let them know.
Great.
Thank you. Let's touch on there's a couple things I want to talk to you about that I found pretty interesting. Let's talk about Paul Hankish for a minute.
Sure.
So my father used to hang out with his son Chris.
Hmm.
Back in the day, my dad would always be going down to Pittsburgh and West Virginia, and he'd hang out with Chris, another guy by the name of Ricky Galtieri, I believe he was in the Boilermaker Union down there, and a few other guys, Junior Williams.
Okay. Gotcha.
Those are just some of the names I remember. But yeah, so and Joey was also godfather to Paul's son Chris.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about Paul.
Yeah. So Paul Hankish, and hopefully I'm not repeating anything you guys have had on before, but I love this character. Like he's one of the most interesting people in the Pittsburgh mob orbit. He was definitely associate. He came up in the 1960s, late 50s, 60s, in Wheeling, West Virginia. Started out as just a gambler, a low level gambler. He would do low level Mickey Mouse scores, like robbing a grocery store. I saw one of them. But he started to become more aggressive in the underworld down there, and he was another interesting thing about him is his parents were from Lebanon. So he was a Lebanese, and his sort of the crime boss in Wheeling at the time was a guy named Big Bill Elias, and he had been around since the Prohibition days. A very experienced racketeer who controlled Wheeling pretty tightly at that time. But Big Bill Elias noticed that Hankish was starting to move in illegal gambling circles without his permission, and so he decided to kill him. And if I'm not mistaken, it was like 1964, so like early mid 60s. Their rivalry comes to a head, and Hankish is walking out of his suburban house, and he gets in his car and he starts it, and it explodes. A terrific explosion, rattles the windows on the street there in Wheeling, and the car's on fire. Hankish is lives through it. Actually, he's screaming for his life. People are obviously rushing over, and the police arrive. Emergency services arrive, and he's screaming, "Get me out of here! Get me out of here!" And they're able to extract him. His one of his legs is blown off completely. The other one is still partially attached, just barely. And they have to amputate it in the hospital. Now, some people say that he actually said, "Hey, it's Big Bill Elias that did this to me," and sort of the delirium after the explosion. And so the police, talked about that at like a press conference, basically in public. And when that got back to him, he immediately had his lawyer say, "Hey, I didn't say anything," and this is from his hospital bed. So even if he did say it, he still clearly wanted to be in the rackets, and he corrected that immediately.
Yeah.
And so after that happened, Big Bill was old news, and Hankish clamped down on the city despite his injuries. When we think of gangsters, we don't think of somebody who has such a severe incident and severe handicap, because you have to beat people up and all that sort of thing. But Hankish was able to not only survive but thrive, and he actually put out a hit on Big Bill Elias. He had two guys from New York sitting outside his house, but Elias was basically aware of what was going on. He never came out, so the hit was called off. But the damage was done. Elias died in 1970, and Hankish was the king of Wheeling after that. And he had connections all over the place. He had connections, as you mentioned, to Youngstown, Joey Naples. He had connections to Manorino up in New Kensington. He was obviously directly connected to the Pittsburgh family, so he was paying up profits, a piece of his profits to Pecora. Later on, Chucky Porter, and then eventually Zola as well. And he also had connections to Sam the Plumber de Cavalcante in North Jersey.
Yep.
Gambino family. Those were Gambino connected guys that actually tried to help him kill Elias. So he was, for a guy from a fairly small town, when you think about it, Wheeling, the population is in the tens of thousands of people. Smaller than Youngstown, I'd say, at its height, for sure.
Every time I hear Wheeling, I think about going down to the dog track.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's like, it has this crazy, huge underworld that has connections all over the place. And that's what's so interesting about Paul Hankish.
Yeah, well, there's the joke was, anytime you wanted to get together with a bunch of people from Youngstown, you just go down to Mountaineer. That was before the casinos came here and to the area. The love of gambling still lives strong in this area. And and you'd see more Ohio plates, in those West Virginia casinos than you would any other cars.
Yeah.
And I always thought, Pittsburgh, by the the end of the century there, Pittsburgh controls Eastern Ohio. They're controlling Western Pennsylvania. They're controlling West Virginia. That's a lot of power. When you look at all that combined, it's kind of surprising, I think, to because like you mentioned, Pittsburgh never gets any big notoriety, and they're very low key.
Yes. And like, when you think about that large territory, and this is one of the major themes of the book, is that Larocca, as powerful as he was, as he started to age in the late 70s, early 80s, he also started to slow down, and like several law enforcement documents and the people who actually worked those cases agree too. Like, he wasn't interested in making people anymore. He wasn't, he might have not been that force that he was in the earlier decades. But when Mike Genovese took over, he wanted to correct what he saw as like people starting to think of the Pittsburgh family as too old and not worthy of respect anymore. And he instituted that street tax on that whole territory that you just talked about, West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And had his guys actually out there, uh, cracking some heads basically, and making the bookies pay up.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
I talked to a widow of a bookie here that was killed in Youngstown, and whenever I brought up Joey's name, it was Joey. His guys were coming around asking for to kick in when say under Ronnie or whoever they weren't doing that. So
mhm.
yeah, it's that the evidence of that people got to start kicking in, got to collect, right?
Yep. And if you had heard about uh, the sort of beef that the Pittsburgh family had with Nicodemo Scarfo.
Hmm.
Yeah, so like that was a side effect of the street tax, right? So like, they're trying to tax somebody who's actually blood related to him, well, through marriage related to him, and that guy was able to reach out and get help from Scarfo on that. But it shows that the tax was not something that people were just talking about. It was, you know,
Scarfo from Philadelphia, right?
Philadelphia. Sorry about that. Yeah, so,
Yeah.
uh,
No, yeah, it's just we try to bring it back to in case you're watching this and you don't have all these years of research, so
yeah,
sometimes we know we can lose people in the weeds, right?
yeah,
So if you're wondering about the guy we were talking about there in West Virginia, once again, that was Paul No Legs Hankish, and some of these characters is I imagine they'll read about Paul in your book as well.
yes, absolutely. There's a chapter on wheeling.
So real quick, tell folks again where they can find the book, what it's called. Go, give them the pitch. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. It's Steel City Mafia, Blood Betrayal, and Pittsburgh's Last Dawn, and it's coming out on April 17th of this year. So just a few days, and it's going to be a book that's going to give you the Pittsburgh Mafia A to Z, and it's really the first book to do that. You'll see how all these different towns we've been talking about are interconnected, and it's an exciting story. I mean, this is a story that could be worthy of a show or a movie, really. And like, I don't think a lot of people understand that, and understand that you had your own little Sopranos drama going on right in your backyard. And it's Youngstown is fairly well known, but for those people who live in West Virginia uh, and Altoona and Johnstown and up in Erie and Pittsburgh, it was going on in those places too. And Youngstown definitely has a lot of the dramatic stories. Like it's, I mean, the stories there are so good. I mean, you guys,
Yeah.
it's just good. But the other towns have their murders, and they have their uh, their rackets and their beatdowns too.
Well, it's good that you wrote the book because we need more people to write these books, right? We need
Absolutely.
the more research you can tell from cities that haven't had their stories told. Youngstown, we
Yes.
we do that a lot every week, but Pittsburgh, and if you're watching this on YouTube again, there's also a Pittsburgh Mob group in Facebook.
Yes.
You should join that as well. There's a Cleveland group. There's all kinds of groups on there. We kind of manage the Youngstown and the Pittsburgh groups. So please definitely join that group if you want to know more. Pick up Paul's book. Um, I just have one more question I want to get to real quick,
Sure.
which is, Pittsburgh's Last Dawn, right?
Mhm.
Let's talk about Lenny Strollo a little bit. And correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, is that who you consider Pittsburgh's Last Dawn, Lenny Strollo?
No, no. For me, it's Mike Genovese. Um, uh,
Okay.
so he, after he died, um, from what I understand from talking to people, the structure of the Pittsburgh Mafia kind of just melted away. There were still made guys hanging around, and some people say that uh, John Bazzano Jr. might have taken a sort of a leading role at that point, but he only lived until 2008 too. So it was just sort of a bunch of made guys still doing the illegal gambling stuff, still probably a few other scams too, but it was after Mike, it was kind of a not as coherent of a unit.
Have you ever been to the Mob Museum out in Las Vegas?
No, but I definitely want to visit that. I've
So
actually never been to
there's
Las Vegas, so
oh wow, you definitely got to go. But no, there's a display they have that's kind of like a seat at the table, I think is what it's called.
mhm,
And it has every big city and every small city. They have them listed on plates up there. So even Youngstown's got its own plate, you know.
mhm.
And then there's this interactive display that you can go to, and it shows the plates, and it doesn't go into a Youngstown one, but it does talk about Pittsburgh. And in it, this is why I said Lenny Strollo, the Pittsburgh's Last Dawn.
Mhm.
In this plate in the Mob Museum in Las Vegas, it actually says that Lenny was the last boss of Pittsburgh. And I swear this is on there. And I brought it up in a previous episode because it's the first time I'd ever heard that, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know where they got that information from, but I don't know if they just meant by the last surviving, because he survived all the way up until 2021, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the last I think that he was survived. So one, I wouldn't count him as a member anymore because he became a government witness. But the last member
Is
in good
that
standing,
automatic? Take your card away. Is
I think so.
that how
But
it works?
the last member who also died in 2021, alleged member, was Thomas Sonny Chianchuti. Um, and he was the last one that we're aware of anyway. So
Yeah.
as you were
And
saying,
then,
made
there's a
unmade
name
can be a little bit crazy sometimes.
there's a name as well that we've heard made some stops in Youngstown as recently as this decade, a couple years ago, right before, so we've we got a lot of people here that are on our sources and sides that are close to the inner sanctum there in Pittsburgh. But
There,
you know,
there,
you, they'd come out for so wedding and things of that nature. They'd come to Youngstown still. So we hear
there,
we hear the stories all the time.
there's a 2017 FBI document that I found just online, and it was talking about some kind of city work contract scam that was going on allegedly, and they refer in code to supposedly Sonny Chianchuti, but and then the document goes on to refer to him as the head of the Pittsburgh LCN, but I do not include him as like the last boss, because if you're the only made guy left, I don't know if that counts, man.
That's what Lenny said. That's what Lenny Sherlock said on the stand when he was testifying in Youngstown. They said, and I'm paraphrasing here. The question was the effect of, you know, you're the boss, right? You're the boss now, and he says something to the effect of the boss of what?
Yeah,
He says there's nothing left. That's what he
yeah,
said.
yeah.
So, it's interesting, but I'm definitely, gonna get a copy of that book when it first comes out because, there's a huge Youngstown connection. If you're watching this and you're in the Youngstown mob group, you're gonna want to get this book. I mean, there's just nothing else out there really published on Pittsburgh like that. What do you think, Jim?
Absolutely. I gotta ask you this. So, you know, there's theories and all these different innuendos about who killed Joey Naples, right?
Mhm.
Everybody thinks it was the guest of our last episode, Emil Denzio.
Yeah.
Am I inclined to believe that? Yeah. Um, do I have any definitive proof? No. All the evidence is circumstantial, right?
Yeah, by the way, you
Mhm.
you were very calm in that interview. I didn't know, I didn't look over and didn't know what to expect. I was like, oh,
You know what they say, business, never personal.
there you go.
Yeah, yeah.
No. But what are your thoughts?
So I call uh I call that the independent operator theory, like the person you were just referring to. Um, and it's hard for me to accept. that somebody would just kill a made guy without getting ordered to do it. However, it's the only theory that makes sense. Like I in any other family, I'm not sure that this is how it would play out. And I'll give you an example from something that I heard on Crooked City, which I loved. The
Thank
Crooked
you.
City podcast that Johnny did. So when Mark Bacho starts talking about the Lawrence Sisman murder and how he would hear the Biondillo crew talking about Sisman and complaining about him a lot and being like, man, sort of an offhand comments like, I wish I whack that guy, or whatever. And he sort of takes that in, and then there's that personal reason for not liking Sisman. He gets fired from his job at Palace in the Pines. And then he goes and he takes him out. And clearly it was done without permission, and people in that crew were angry about it. But Ernie Biondillo kind of said, hey guys, simmer down. Bacho's going to be, you're not going to hurt Bacho. Bacho's fine. And I think Mark Bacho is really obviously appreciative of that. But that was kind of like what people say happened with Naples too. Like, this Strollo's complaining about him, and I guess, and you've got this person that's hanging around them, and then he takes action in order to get in with Lenny. And it's just so many orders of magnitude worse when it's a made guy, though. Like I said before, in the mob, people brush off the murders of associates, but for someone like Naples, who was not only made but also a ridiculous legend, like in the underworld, there, like, I mean, he was like, you can't match the reputation that guy had in the underworld, just can't.
It's shocking that you haven't seen the Hollywood movie yet.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, to me, like when you're talking about a guy like Henry Hill, and I know that back when that movie was made, there weren't a lot of informants to sort of write about, like, or stories, from the mob. Like, there are many more mob stories now because so many people have talked and you have so much more rich stories. But like when you compare the people in that movie to somebody like Naples, I mean, like, there's just no comparison. Like, they were mostly associates in that movie, and this guy just the amount of stories is just crazy.
Absolutely.
I'll say this: in the research that we've done, there is an FBI affidavit that was released when Lenny Strollo's indictment came out and his crew's indictment came out. So this would have been 98. That had a person from Pittsburgh that had told the FBI that they were given the contract to kill Joey along with the Dinzio brothers by Bernie Altshuler, Bernie the Jew. This is an affidavit that, like I said, this was released by the FBI in 98. So, that has always been, in my opinion, the leading theory. The Dinzio is very close with Bernie. Even in our interview, Emil still had good things to say about Bernie. Had not so good things to say about Lenny, but good things to say about Bernie. And so, that I think was a leading theory in my opinion. But I've grappled with did it come from Lenny or did it not come from Lenny? And ultimately, I think it did. I really do think it did, because if it came through Bernie, it would have come through Lenny. But it's one of those mysteries right there. So,
and I talked to another gentleman that's done a bunch of research, and he told me that the order came from Chucky Porter. That I guess Porter there was supposedly some wiretap or something where Porter was complaining about Joey building that big house that he was building out in Beaver Township, and he was bringing too much attention and everything going on with Lenny and this and that. And I heard that Porter was the one that ordered it, but who knows?
I'll counter my argument and say this: I don't think that could be possible to say in 1991 that Joey's bringing too much heat compared to the last 30, 60 years, 30
Yeah.
years of his life. I mean, the amount
Right.
of heat that he was bringing in 91 was not at his heyday,
Yeah. The one
that
thing that
crazy.
the one thing that I'll say about that is that like with Chucky, by the time Joey was killed, Chucky had been in prison for uh over a year. Now that's not to say you can't kill somebody from prison, but it's happened
Right.
before, obviously. But
And then he was in a halfway house, right? So yeah.
and then right after Naples was killed is when Chucky Porter started to inform. He started in 1992, uh, talking to the Pittsburgh office about not about historical things. So like not about I don't think it was part of his cooperation agreement to be like this is who killed Joey Naples or this is who did that or this is who in the past.
Right.
It was more like what is going on right now? Who are they trying to kill right now? And he ended up saving uh 6 lives according to the court the court
I
transcript.
always laugh at that story because isn't it one of the lives, or at least one of the lives that he saved was, somebody that he was gonna kill, right? His guys were wasn't that like
So
was a snitch?
yeah, it was literally the person who testified against him in his trial. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
get
So
they got word to him that hey, we're going to take care of this guy, and he was like supposedly going to come visit family in Pittsburgh, and they were going to get him.
but
And
I always laugh at that because it's like come on, that was a hit that Chuck Porter could have called off. You know what I mean? So it's like to say that
possibly,
he saved him by by informing. I always laughed at that, but I don't know.
possibly, like I see that's the thing about this mob stuff. Like there's so many different stories, and you kind of have to pick like the most plausible one. And
Yeah.
it's easy to go with court because that's when people, they face consequences if they lie, right? Like you go to prison. Um,
I'm telling you,
but
I'm researching stuff right now, Paul, and I'm working actively on some things where I don't even just because they got convicted of something. I know that it's not always the truth, So there's it's crazy some of these true crime cases out there.
true crime is hard.
Unfortunately,
For
oh
sure.
man,
It's hard.
it really is. It really is.
The reason that I kind of believe that Lenny wasn't involved is because Lenny copped to so many murder conspiracies that why would he be afraid of one more? Because he copped to the Carabia
Because he
one.
lived here for the last 20 years.
Yeah,
And
no, but
that could be too. Maybe he just didn't cop to that one because he knew that part of his deal he was going to be able to come back and live here. Whereas if he cops to having Joey killed, can he really come back and live here? I mean,
but he,
there's going to be people that are going to want to take him out for all intents and purposes,
Yeah,
regardless.
as I don't know if Ernie
Mhm.
held that weight.
Right,
And also they had him on the Ernie thing.
right.
They didn't have him on, say, Joey.
Yeah, because
yeah.
like everything. Now, here's the funny thing. So if you bring up the Joey killing to Emil Denzio
Mhm.
and um, what he'll tell you is that his brother's place was never searched like the FBI says it was.
Mm.
The FBI says that they found these rubber Joy foot boot covers, right?
Oh yeah, I
That
heard that on
suppose
Crooked City. Yep.
that supposedly matched the pattern, right? That
Yeah.
they found a whole box of these things in the closet in the house when they did the search, right?
Mhm.
Emil say none of that ever happened. The
Mhm.
FBI never came and searched the houses. So what do you believe? You know?
Yeah. I mean,
That's true
so
crime in a nutshell. What do you believe?
Yeah.
the one thing I will say is that it seems like, and unfortunately I never got to talk to him directly, but there is so much out there that he says is that I view Bob Croner as a great source. Like he seems like a pretty straight shooter. Um, and I don't know if the totes rubber stuff came from him, but he seems
Yeah, yeah,
a,
it
a
did on Crooked City, and yeah,
like the guy I was talking to in Pittsburgh, the agent there, who worked a ton of those cases over like 20 years. He said that Bob was like the best partner to have in Youngstown. Um,
Yeah. And and I've always talked to about anytime we mention the FBI and whether they were crooked or corrupt. Like I said, definitely believe Stanley Peterson was, but it coincides like
yeah.
that the next era, Bob Croner comes in as the next wave of agents.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
don't think his time with Peterson even overlapped. We mentioned Larry Lynch, those were
Right.
the overlapping. Um, but yeah, I've always believed Bob to be straight arrow. And I
Yeah,
believe the
yeah,
stories. I believe when Lenny went to his father's, sent people to his father's house to try to see if they could corrupt him, get what could they get on Bob. And even the father was like, Bob's his own man. He won't,
yeah.
you can't get, you can't make him do that. So I believe Bob, it was a straight arrowed FBI agent. I don't believe he was ever corrupt or crooked. Some
Mhm.
people might disagree, but that's just my own personal belief. Having met him, we were on a stage at the Youngstown Playhouse a couple years back. We did a whole thing out there together. Um, and yeah, that's just my personal opinion. And
Yeah.
you know, I don't think there was anything there. Um, but yeah, I think he was a straight edge
And
cop,
and I think it's amazing
FBI.
that you had a straight shooter like that at the same time as you had Paul Gaines, there too. Like that's one of the amazing things about the Youngstown story too, is like how how all these things came together at the end and kind of like
Yeah. Well,
upended it.
there were you go back to the 40s. Every now and then there's a few guys that buck the trend, and they go against the grain in Youngstown, and they don't take the mob's money. You go back to Henderson. Charles Henderson becomes a mayor, and his whole campaign was smash rackets rule. For once, they were in the middle of the 40s. They were going to clean up the mob,
Hmm.
and then they bring in. He asks the FBI. He asks J. Edgar Hoover to personally recommend a police chief, and they bring in Eddie Allen, who was that incorruptible, straight edge, a cop. So the history has these guys in Youngstown every now and then. Seems
Hmm.
like they were there from the 40s and part of the 50s until public public perception got tired of that, and they wanted things to be wide open again, so they voted Henderson out.
Right.
Uh, and then you fast forward to the 70s, late 70s, Bob Croner comes in, and the 90s and Paul Gaines. So yeah, you do have different points in history,
Yeah.
a few people to step out of, the shadows and say, "Hey, this stuff's going on here. We're not going to put up with it." But you know,
Well, and two, part of the problem is that you have of why the Youngstown and Pittsburgh factions don't exist today is because like you said, they with Larocca, he kind of closed the books. They really didn't make too many new guys.
Hmm.
Um, you know, and I think part of that is, at that time they didn't actually know who they could trust to even make, right?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
So,
Yep.
so that kind of falls into it. And same with Youngstown. I'm sure there was guys that Joey would have loved to have made.
Hmm.
Um, but I think Pittsburgh kind of saw as well that, you have Lenny bringing all these guys in that are not Italian, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that kind of worried Pittsburgh a little bit as well, is why they didn't make any more guys after, you know, Joey and Lenny, really.
Yeah. And if
They may have made one or two here and there, but there was no refilling of the ranks, so to speak.
if you want to hear my theory on that, it jives with what you're saying to a point. Like, uh, I think after the 1990 trial, when uh, Joey Rosa, who was a one of their major drug pipelines, flipped, and then in 2000 they learned that Chucky Porter flipped, and then of course in 98 Strollo does 98 99. Um, After all that happened, I think that that, and this is just my opinion, it's an educated opinion, but it's my opinion, is that the boss basically was like, "This family, I'm putting a hit out on this family. Basically, it's just going to die off of old age." Um, and it was reported back in the '70s when he went to prison for like 6 months, Mike Genovese, for not testifying at a grand jury. That that he basically said to his associates, "I'm never going back to prison again." Um, and I think that, you know, in order to stick to that promise and to uh, be with his family, really, um, he had that the example of Licavoli and a bunch of other guys right in front of him, right? Um, like after especially after Chucky and Rosa and Strollo, it was like, all right, this thing is going to end. It's over. There's no document that
Gotcha.
says that, but that's the sense
Right.
I get from reading everything.
And I got a little bit of sense of that too for read those documents that you had sent me on Michael. I kind of got that feeling too. I'm just kind of perusing through them and reading, different chapters in his life.
Yep.
That he got that way, towards the end. It was more, especially the way he insulated himself from other people
Yep.
and the steps he took to keep everything as secret as he could.
Yep.
So I definitely agree with that.
All right. Well, I tell you what, we've gone over our usual time limit here. We a pretty nice long episode. We appreciate your time, Paul. And you know, I'm a big stickler with hard copies of books. So
Yep.
I checked out. You sent us a good ebook there, and I checked it a little bit, but I've been waiting because I just love
Mhm.
to have that book in my hand. So the book again comes out April 17th. Is that correct?
Yep. April 17th, Steel City Mafia, Blood Betrayal, and Pittsburgh's Last Dawn.
Where do you prefer people buy it from?
So I would say go to Arcadia Publishing's website. That's where you're going to get uh, the best deal. Obviously, I don't mind that if people have their Amazon account or whatever, it's going to be on every major bookseller, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and many
Nice.
others.
Well, I'll tell you what,
So
maybe we Jim, what do you think? Maybe we bring Paul in and we set up some kind of an event here with him to talk about we're trying to plan a lecture series right now too.
okay,
So we're looking to do some dates around, summer and fall of this year. Yeah, we'd love to bring you in and have you maybe just have a whole event around you and see, bring a lot of books because people in Youngstown love this stuff. They love the history of it. They
yeah,
buy the books. Um, so again, we're so happy to see somebody publishing a book on the Pittsburgh family.
Absolutely.
It's really great. So thank you so much for coming. We'll have you on the show again, or we'll plan an event and we'll keep the people posted. Anything else you want to, how do people reach out to you?
So I'd say the easiest way is you could just reach out to me on Facebook, Paul Hodos, Hodos. I also have an email, paulhodos@gmail.com. Very, very easy, just my name at Gmail, no spaces. So if you have any questions or you want to ask me for, like a signed copy, I don't have a ton of copies at home right now. I just got my advanced ones, and I'm excited. They look great. And I'm very excited if I would get to come up and see you guys in person. That would be great.
That-
That'd be awesome.
Absolutely.
Paul, thank you again. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to us. We just love hearing the stories. We could probably sit here for another 4 hours and talk about this stuff and just,
Me too.
I mean, that's just how it is,
Yep.
Did you go down a lot of rabbit holes in your research?
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, when you're writing a book, like you got to cut out so much stuff, and it pains me to do it. But but in mafia books, one of the big complaints is always there's too many names. I tried to keep the names down to a certain extent, so it's very readable.
Right. Johnny, what do they always tell us? The guys that get mad is the guys whose names don't get mentioned in the book, right?
That's right. That's or the movie or the book. Yeah,
Right.
we've been told that many times. So yeah.
Yep.
Thanks again, Paul. We really appreciate you coming on. Make sure you guys get out there and get his book. It's going to be fantastic. Johnny, you have anything else for today?
No, that was a good show. We like to do these, some guests. And the last couple weeks now, this is two guest shows in a row. We're mixing it up for you guys. Like I said, we got a big show we're planning, live show at the end of this year. We can't wait to share the details. The Mob Tour app is coming out this summer. We've got Jim's wearing, I see an amazing podcast logo. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But we've got the Steel Valley Syndicate website, you can get some merchandise, get a nice shirt. Check that out. We got a link up here for you. We'll put it in the post as well. So much stuff we're working on, guys, trying to bring you a lecture series right now, as I mentioned with Paul, where we maybe can bring in some authors, or, we'll tackle a certain subject. So keep an eye out for that. We really appreciate all your support, and we do this for you guys, the mob associates out there.
Absolutely.
Everybody's interested in this stuff. We're all historians here to some degree. So, we really do appreciate the audience. The biggest thing you can do for us right now is give this video a like, share, and subscribe. When I say share, I mean send it to your family and your friends and say, hey, have you seen this show? Check it out. Because that really helps us get the word of mouth out there. And we really do hope people from the whole Mahoning Valley can kind of latch on and learn some history with these videos that we do.
Absolutely.
So-
I mean, that's what it's about. It's about educating people to the history and the influences of these gentlemen and what they brought to the table. Because regardless of them being criminals, right, all that money that they made, a lot of it got spent in those communities, and
Yeah.
propped up a lot of those communities for a long time too, as well.
So again, check it out. Steel City Mafia. It's a new book, April 17th. It'll be out. And I think that does it for us.
Yeah.
Got to thank those sponsors, because, again, without them, we cannot do these shows.
Yeah, we want to thank our sponsors, Cut and Toast, 160 Louisville Road in Struthers, Ohio. If you're looking for a great cigar, go out and see the guys at Cut and Toast. They will hook you up. I can't wait till we go back there for another show. I always enjoy the cigars. And our other sponsor?
Youngstown Tile. Of course, if you're looking for good flooring, spectacular flooring, you want to find somewhere local. There's no place better than Youngstown Tile. So go bold, go local, go Youngstown Tile. We thank them so much. And that does it for this week's episode of Youngstown Mob Talk. On behalf of Jimmy Naples, I'm Johnny Chechitelli. Our special guest this week, Paul Hodos. Thank you very much, everybody. Ciao.
That was an amazing podcast from an amazing podcast company. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like and subscribe buttons and share it with your friends. It goes a long way in helping us produce more amazing content.